Hails and welcome to Rauta's ranking videos, or worst to best, like we like to call it. This one we're going to talk about one classic band that didn't exist too long. That is in terms of albums anyway. This is Sarcofago, and let's tune in for Metal Archive site for the backdrop. So this band from Brazil is definitely one of those bands that in so many ways influenced a lot of bands all around the world with their initial recordings. Now, having founded as early as 1985, they were quite early on in the game, especially when we're talking about black thrash. Now, consequently, the band has been put into different kind of genres. And that's for a reason. I mean, they're listed as black/trash/death metal, which is very true if you really go through their discography, that is, albums. But besides albums, they also had a few EPs, some demos, and all that stuff. But their active years, not too many. Now, Metal Archives lists them being active from 1985 to 1987, the first era. That's when they released their most valued classic album, Inri. And then they came back a couple of years later to release a few albums more. The Laws of the Scourge, 1991, Hate, 1994, and The Worst in 1996. Now, there are some other releases worth mentioning, like Rotting from 1989, which is actually pretty good. Not exactly as good as Inri, but still. But this is also an interesting band for a couple of reasons. First of all, they changed their music throughout the career. And mind you, everything basically happened within a span of 10 years, roughly, give or take. And also, they lacked drummer for way too long. That is, they used drum programming later on, which resulted in kind of a catastrophic sounding drums, but it is what it is. But before I go to ranking, let's quickly recap the thing here. Inri is the fundamental album of the band, and that came out as early as 1987. That is, already bands like Bathory and Celtic Frost were all over the place and all that stuff. But in the terms of Nordic black metal and the first wave becoming second wave, Inri was before that. So while it wasn't exactly the kind of a Bathory, I mean, it was kind of a more trashy than Bathory stuff, there are some resemblance with that. So definitely kind of a blackish, but also kind of a trashier. And also, in a way, more chaotic and fast forward. However, it's not like it's just a shitty played album, but it actually has this kind of a primitive, fundamental feeling like you're dealing with something dangerous and all that stuff. So I can only understand how it must have affected bands like, I'm guessing, I don't really know all the bands or how they went throughout the history, but just dropping some ideas to your head, like Blasphemy or Beherit or Archgoat and the like. Imbel Nazarene maybe. You know, the kind of bands that started doing very, very violent and aggressive extreme metal, but not leaning towards death metal, not leaning towards thrash metal only, but having this kind of a blacker feeling to it. So after bands like Bathory and Celtic Frost and so forth, there was some kind of a void for these kind of bands to emerge, taking the next step from trash to something even more extreme and violent and dangerous and, you know, darker aspect. And also not going to as heavy and brutal like some death metal bands started to do in, you know, late 80s. So there was definitely a place for bands like Sarcofago to just appear and make their, you know, stamp on the pages of history. And that's where Inri came in 1987. That's why it's considered a classic album, and I can totally understand why, because it's a good album, even if not great in my opinion. Then, a few years later, when the band had actually came back, Laws of the Scourge appeared, but this time it was more death metallic. There's still a lot of reminiscence towards, you know, the earlier works, but so many ways this is more death trash, or even just death metallic to begin with, rather than being a black metal or black metal related album. And I am pretty convinced that a lot of people had abandoned the band by now, or at least would abandon, because it wasn't exactly going as black trash or early waves of black metal in the same way as the debut album. Then another 3 years later came in Hate, and then another 2 years later came the worst. And why I'm summing up these two together is that they are very much like siblings to one another. That is, it's more on the death metal side, while still combining those thrasher elements, and they also have this horrible drum programming used, which is then again another thing to lose the magic what Inri had. So it's almost like the band became a different entity while still maintaining the roots to the original recordings. But a lot of things changed within these 10 years. Nowadays bands, when you're thinking of today's bands, that is, it might feel weird that during 10 years things changed so much. Because nowadays it might take actually a few years for a band to record their first album, and by 10 years they might have then multitude of albums. Some bands might release an album every 2 years or even one in a year. So having 10 years and so much changing, it's different. But nowadays also bands are not so much pioneering as during the age when Sarcofago was founded. So obviously it's a very different territory. Nowadays it's kind of safer to just keep going on with your rails or comfort zone, like a lot of people would guess say. And it's easy to just, say, hey, how come they changed so much and blah, blah, blah. But those were different times. Those are the days or years when extreme metal was pretty much formed. I'm talking still about the 80s. So by the early 90s, a lot of things had abandoned what they were doing. Some black metal bands started playing death metal. Some death metal bands started playing black metal, especially in Norway. Just take a look at that. And some bands changed from thrash to death metal. Some probably abandoned their death metal, went artsy-fartsy. That goes also to a lot of black metal names. And also, if you think about this 10 years, think about Emperor, how much they changed from the very first album by the time they were done with their fourth album. So, given the 10 years, the era, it's not that big a deal if you really think about it. I mean, those kind of stories have happened to a lot of bands. And there are, of course, a lot of bands doing the same outside extreme metal. So we don't even have to limit ourselves talking about thrash metal or death metal or black metal. There are plenty of styles that kept going on. Some might say they evolved. Some might say they devolved. Some might say that just they changed too much, went in a different direction with a new name, or keeping the old name. Various stories and all individual. And okay, now I'm getting sidetracked here. But the thing here is, what started as a black thrash later on became so much more death metal influenced, with a lot of thrash still being in play. Not so much black metal, however. And I guess that's one of the reasons why Inri is so much, still worshipped or valued, rated highly, versus the ones that came later on. And now comes the bomb, if you can say that. Yes, this is a band that very much has its discography as in direct opposite how the band actually evolved. Now, there are lots of bands which I have described going in various alphabets. Some go V-shaped, starting quite nicely, going down and then going up again. Some are W's, highs and lows, and just everything changed from the albums. And then there are inverted V's, like basically A letters. You're like starting low and shitty, and then you become better and only to come up, down again. Or J, or whatever. But in terms of evolution, or lack of it, Sarcofago is an I. It's basically a direct line like this. And definitely like that, not the opposite of I, like going from up to down. So now you pretty much know the thing, how I'm going to rank them. So the worst is actually the worst. And that is, it's almost like hate, but nothing new added to it. So their last album is actually their weakest. It's not that bad really, but the drum machine is fucking annoying, and there are weird lyrics and all that stuff, which makes it more confusing. Never until recently I realized there is almost like a creating the black winds of blasphemy about like worst is to come. I don't know if this is fully accurate, but I get the feeling from the lyrics, what I'm hearing and what I'm reading. It is almost like sending regards. Hey, black winds out of there in blasphemy. Worst is to come. You had shitty things, but things are going to get more shittier. I don't know. It just feels like that. Now, hate is very close to the worst in style. And also having this horrible drum programming. And or machine drums, programmed drums. But because it came first, it's hard for me to put it beyond the worst, because they are basically the same level. It's almost as if they were made in the same session. and the worst came after that. So in terms of ranking these two, I would say it doesn't really matter. But because I feel like if there's nothing improving from the previous work, the newer one is going to be ranked below for the obvious reason. If you can't improve, you're kind of bound to be shittier or at maximum the same level. So here is what I'm saying. The worst is the worst, followed by hate. And the second best, you already know it, Loss of the Scourge. I think that is actually quite good of an album in so many ways because it has a really, really nice, cool riffs here and there, and those death metallic parts actually bring something new if, then again, the black metal essence is removed from equation in terms of what was going on with Inri. However, Inri is definitely the classic one, the best one by the band. It's not great for me either, but I kind of like it a lot, especially here and there. There are moments when there's some cool riffs and it sounds so badass, even now some 35 years later. So it's a powerful album, not as powerful in my opinion as Bathory's black metal ones, not to mention the other styles, but in terms of black metal, I think all the Bathory ones are better. However, Inri still has its impact, and it's definitely worth listening to even nowadays. I mean, the production is not very good and all that stuff, but it fits the music and everything kind of has its place on the album. So if you're asking me how I'm going to rank them, there you have it. Worst being the worst, followed by hate, then Loss of the Scourge, and the best Inri. If you need to have only one album of all Sarcofago productions, it's obviously Inri, and the rest can pretty much be ignored. But I still recommend giving Loss of Scourge a chance. It's worth listening to, even if it's not that great. And here it is. I wish that a lot of newer generation will revisit Sarcophago's material, because it's better, probably, than given the credit to. But to each his own and all that stuff. I hope you found some interesting points with this video or some new information, and if not, well, god damn it. See you soon with more reviews and worst to best videos coming your way.